The ship was called the Crimson Throne, and it was the largest warship in the Valari Empire. It moved through space like a metal mountain, covered in scars from 1,000 battles. The Valari had conquered 63 star systems with this ship. They feared nothing and no one. Deep in the lowest levels of the ship, far from the warriors and the officers, there was a place called the Slave Holds. This was where the Valari kept their prisoners, workers taken from conquered worlds, people who had lost everything. Yuna was one of them. She was 26 years old, small and thin, with black hair that she kept tied back from her face. 7 months ago, she had been living on Europa, a frozen moon near Jupiter. She had worked as an engineer there, fixing machines and repairing broken systems. It was simple work, quiet work. She'd have been nobody's special dot. Then the Valari came. They took 43 humans from the colony. They put them on ships and carried them across the stars. They sold them as slaves to work on their warships. The Valari thought humans were weak and useless. They gave them the worst jobs: cleaning waste, carrying heavy things, work that nobody else wanted to do. Most of the 43 humans died in the first 3 months. The Valari did not care. Humans were cheap. There were always more. But Yuna survived. She worked in the waste processing section, where all the broken and unwanted things ended up. Old machines, damaged equipment, things the Valari warriors threw away without a second thought. To them, it was all garbage. To Yuna, it was treasure. Every night, when the guards grew tired and stopped watching, she would look through the waste. She found broken tools and fixed them. She found damaged parts and made them work again. She built a small workspace hidden behind the waste containers, where she kept everything she had repaired. She did not know why she did it. Maybe it was habit. Maybe it was hope. Or maybe it was just because she was an engineer, and engineers fix things. That was what they did. Her first real repair was a heating unit. The slave quarters were cold, so cold that 3 workers had died from it the month before. The heating system had been broken for a long time, and nobody cared enough to fix it. Why would they? Slaves were not important. Yuna found the broken heating unit in the waste pile one night. She carried it back to her hidden workspace and opened it up. The problem was simple: a burned-out power connector. She found a replacement in another piece of garbage and connected it carefully. When she turned the unit on, it hummed to life. She put it back in the slave quarters that night. Nobody knew who had fixed it. Nobody asked. But the quarters were warm now, and fewer people got sick. After that, Yuna fixed other things. A water purifier that had not worked in months. A light panel that kept flickering. A door that would not close properly. Each repair was small and quiet. She never told anyone. She never asked for thanks, but the other slaves noticed. They started to look at her differently. They started to bring her things. A broken tool here. A damaged piece of equipment there. She fixed everything they gave her. Then, one night, everything changed. Yuna was working in the waste section when she heard a loud crash. Something heavy had fallen down the waste chute. She walked over to look and stopped breathing. It was a piece of armor. But not just any armor. This was ceremonial battle armor, made of dark metal and strange crystals that glowed with inner light. The design was beautiful and terrible at the same time. And on the chest, there was a symbol that everyone in the Empire knew. The royal crest of Queen Valith. Yuna stood very still. Her heart was beating so hard she could hear it in her ears. This was the Queen's own armor. The Queen who had ruled the Valari for 200 years. The Queen who had conquered more worlds than anyone in history. The Queen who could kill with a single word. The armor was damaged. There was a long crack running down the center of the breastplate, and the crystals were flickering weakly. Someone must have thrown it away. Maybe they thought it was beyond repair. Maybe they were afraid to touch it. Yuna knew she should leave it alone. She should report it to the guards. She should pretend she had never seen it. Touching the queen's armor without permission was probably punishable by death, but she was an engineer, and it was broken. She stood there for a long time, fighting with herself. Every smart part of her brain told her to walk away, but her hands were already reaching for the armor. Her fingers were already touching the cold metal. She picked it up. It was heavier than she expected. She carried it back to her hidden workspace and set it down on her makeshift table. The crack was bad, but not impossible. The metal was strange, different from anything she had worked with before. But metal was metal. It followed rules. It could be understood. She worked through the night. She used a technique called molecular welding, something humans had invented for emergency repairs in deep space. It was not fancy or complicated. It was just practical. You worked with what you had. By morning, the crack was gone. The metal was whole again, but Yuna did not stop there. She looked at the power core, the crystals that gave the armor its strength. They were old and tired, running at maybe 60% of their full power. She cleaned them. She realigned them. She made them sing. Then she looked at the neural interface, the part that connected the armor to the wearer's mind. It was full of tiny damage from years of combat. She cleaned that too. When she was finished, the armor was not just repaired. It was better than it had ever been. Yuna sat back and looked at her work. She felt proud and terrified at the same time. She had done something impossible. She had done something that could get her killed. She hid the armor in her workspace and went back to her normal duties. Maybe nobody would notice. Maybe it would be forgotten. She was wrong. 3 days passed. Yuna tried to forget about the armor. She went back to her normal work, cleaning waste and staying invisible. She told herself that everything would be fine. Nobody knew what she had done. Nobody would ever find out. She was eating her morning ration when the ship started to shake. Not from an attack. Not from an engine problem. The ship was shaking because someone was screaming. And that scream was so loud, so powerful, that it traveled through the metal walls like thunder. Who fixed my armor? Every person on the ship heard it. Every slave, every worker, every soldier. They all stopped what they were doing and listened. They all knew that voice. Queen Vaelith. In the royal chambers at the top of the ship. The queen stood before her armor. She was 7 feet tall, with skin like burnt copper and eyes that glowed like twin suns. She had lived for more than 200 years. She had killed more enemies than she could count. She had never been afraid of anything in her entire life. But right now, she was angry. More angry than she had been in decades. Her royal guards stood around her, frozen in fear. The generals would not look at her face. Nobody dared to speak. The armor stood on its display stand, exactly where it was supposed to be. But it was different now. The crack that had destroyed it was gone. The power core, which had been weak and dying, now glowed with strength it had not shown in 50 years. Everything about it was perfect. Someone had fixed it. Someone had touched the sacred armor of the queen without permission. Someone had done the impossible. "I want answers," the queen said. Her voice was quieter now, but somehow more dangerous. "I want to know who did this. I want to know how. And I want them brought before me, alive." Her guards moved immediately. They were afraid of failing her more than they were afraid of anything else. The search began. First, they checked the royal weaponsmiths. These were the Valari's finest craftsmen, masters who had worked on royal equipment for generations. They had examined the armor after the assassination attempt. They had declared it beyond repair. The damage was too severe, they said. The techniques needed to fix it did not exist, but someone had fixed it anyway. The weaponsmiths were terrified. They swore they had not touched the armor after their examination. They did not know how it had been repaired. They did not recognize the techniques that had been used. The guards moved on. They checked the security recordings. They followed the armor's path through the ship, from the royal chambers to the waste disposal system. Someone had thrown it away. Someone had decided it was garbage. The trail led downward, past the warrior decks, past the officer quarters, past the technician base, all the way down to the lowest level of the ship. The slave holds. The guards entered the waste processing section with weapons ready. They searched through the garbage and the broken equipment. They found nothing at first. Then, one of them moved a pile of waste containers and discovered a hidden workspace. Inside, they found tools, repaired equipment, spare parts that had been carefully organized and stored. And in the corner, still warm from being worked on, they found a heating unit. The guards looked at each other. Someone down here had been fixing things. Someone down here had skills that did not belong to a slave. They asked questions. The other slaves were too afraid to lie. They pointed at the small human woman with black hair who worked in the waste section. The one who had fixed the heating unit. The one who fixed everything. They found Una sitting on an overturned crate, eating her ration of nutrient paste. She looked up when the guards surrounded her. She did not try to run. There was nowhere to go. "You?" the lead guard said. "You are the one they call the fixer?" Una's mouth was dry. She could barely speak. "I just repair small things. Nothing important." The guard grabbed her arm and pulled her to her feet. "You will come with us. The Queen wants to see you." They dragged her through the ship, up through the technician base, up through the officer quarters, up through the warrior decks. Every Valari they passed stopped to stare. A human slave being taken to the royal chambers. That only meant one thing. Execution. Yuna had never been above the slave holds before. She had never seen the upper levels of the ship. The hallways were wider here. The lights were brighter. Everything was clean and beautiful and terrifying. The doors to the royal chambers were 3 times her height. They were made of black metal covered in gold symbols. When they opened, Una felt a wave of cold air wash over her. The chamber inside was bigger than the entire slave section. The ceiling was so high she could barely see it. Strange lights floated in the air like captured stars. And at the far end, on a throne made of dark crystal, sat Queen Valith. The guards pushed Una forward. She stumbled and almost fell. Her legs were shaking so badly she could barely stand. The queen rose from her throne and walked toward her. Each step made the floor shake. Up close, she was even more terrifying. Her claws were longer than Una's fingers. Her teeth were sharp and white. Her eyes burned with a fire that had destroyed entire civilizations. She stopped in front of Una and looked down at her. "So small," the queen said. Her voice was like grinding stone. "So fragile. This is the creature that touched my sacred armor?" Una wanted to speak, but no words came out. She was frozen with fear. The queen smiled. It was not a kind smile. "Let us see," she said. "What secrets you are hiding, little human." The royal chamber was silent. Everyone was watching. The guards stood with their weapons ready. The generals stood with their arms crossed. The nobles and advisors filled the edges of the room, their faces hungry for blood. They all wanted to see the human die. Queen Valith circled around Una slowly, studying her like a predator studying prey. Una stood as still as she could. Her heart was beating so fast she thought it might explode. But she did not cry. She did not beg. She had already accepted that she was probably going to die. "You touched my armor," the queen said. The sacred armor of the Valari throne. Armor that has been worn by 17 queens before me. Armor that my finest weaponsmith said could never be repaired. She stopped in front of Yuna and leaned down. Her face was inches away. Her breath was hot and smelled like metal. And yet, here it stands, perfect, better than perfect. How? Yuna forced herself to speak. Her voice was small, but it did not shake. I meant no disrespect, Your Majesty. The armor was thrown in the waste. I thought it was garbage. I did not know it was yours. That is not what I asked. The Queen's voice grew harder. I asked how. How did you repair what could not be repaired? What technique did you use? Yuna swallowed. She had nothing to lose now. The truth was all she had. Molecular welding, she said. It is a human technique. We invented it for emergency repairs in space, when we cannot get replacement parts. You heat the metal at a very specific temperature and use magnetic fields to bond the molecules together. It is not complicated. It just takes patience. The Queen stared at her. And the power core? My weaponsmith said the crystals were dying, that they could not be restored. The crystals were not dying. They were just dirty and misaligned. Yuna's voice grew a little stronger as she talked about something she understood. Crystal power cores need to be cleaned and recalibrated every few decades. If you do not do this, they lose efficiency. I cleaned yours and realigned the matrix structure. That is why it works better now. There was a murmur in the crowd. Some of the nobles were whispering to each other. The weaponsmiths looked angry and embarrassed. The Queen raised one clawed hand, and everyone went silent. You are telling me, she said slowly, that the great weaponsmiths of the Valari Empire did not know how to clean a power core. I am telling you that sometimes people forget simple things, Yuna said, especially when those things seem too simple to matter. The Queen stood up straight. For a long moment, she just looked at Yuna. Then she did something that nobody expected. She laughed out. It was not a cruel laugh. It was a real laugh, full of surprise and something that might have been respect. The sound echoed through the chamber. The guards looked at each other in confusion. The nobles did not know what to do. 10,000 years, the Queen said. The Valari have been building warships for 10,000 years. We have conquered species older than human civilization. We have the greatest engineers in the galaxy. She gestured the weaponsmiths. And a slave girl from a frozen moon fixed what they could not, using techniques they have never seen. She walked back to her throne and sat down. Her eyes never left Yuna. What else can you fix, little human? Yuna blinked. She had not expected that question. I do not understand, Your Majesty. It is a simple question. You fix my armor. What else can you fix? Weapons? Shields? Engines? I can fix most things, Yuna said carefully, if I have time to understand how they work. The Queen leaned forward. Prove it. She waved her hand, and two guards brought forward a large metal box. Inside was a device that Yuna did not recognize. It was covered in broken wires and cracked panels. Smoke was still rising from it. This is a shield generator from my personal shuttle, the Queen said. It was damaged in an attack last week. My engineers have been trying to repair it for 7 days. They have failed. Fix it, and I will let you live. The chamber went silent again. Everyone was watching. Yuna walked forward and looked at the device. It was complex, more advanced than anything she had ever worked on. But complexity was just simplicity stacked on top of itself. Every machine followed rules. Every machine could be understood. She began to work. She did not have her tools, so she used her hands and her eyes. She traced the wires and found the broken connections. She examined the cracked panels and understood why they had failed. The Valari engineers had been trying to fix the symptoms, not the cause. They had not looked deep enough. It took her 2 hours. The entire court watched in silence. The queen never moved from her throne. Finally, Una stepped back. "It is done." The queen nodded at one of her engineers. He came forward and examined the device. He connected it to a power source and activated it. The shield generator hummed to life, stronger and steadier than it had ever been. The engineer looked at the queen with wide eyes. "It works, Your Majesty. It is better than before." Queen Valith smiled. This time, the smile was different. It was thoughtful, calculating. "Little human," she said. "What is your name?" "Una, Your Majesty, Una." The queen tasted the word like it was something interesting. "You are no longer a slave, Una. From this moment, you belong to me. You will have a workshop. You will have tools. And you will fix everything I tell you to fix." Una did not know what to say. She had expected death. Instead, she had been given something else. A chance. 6 months changed everything. Una's workshop started as a small room on the middle deck of the ship. It had a few tables, some basic tools, and enough space for one person to work. The queen had given it to her as a test, expecting small results. The results were not small. In the first week, Una repaired the queen's personal weapons. She found problems that the royal weaponsmiths had missed for years. Small things like worm bearings and misaligned firing mechanisms. She fixed them all, and the weapons worked better than they had in decades. Word spread quickly on a ship. By the second week, generals were sending her equipment to repair. Plasma rifles that overheated. Shield generators that drained too fast. Targeting systems that could not hit moving targets. Una fixed everything they sent her, but she did not just fix things. She made them better. She found ways to increase weapon power by 15%. She discovered tricks to make shields recharge faster. She improved engine efficiency using techniques that the Valari had never imagined. Every piece of equipment that passed through her hands came back upgraded. The queen noticed. She gave Una a bigger workshop, then a bigger one, then an entire deck. She also gave her assistants. The first was a young Valari female named Soha. She was from the lower castes, born into a family with no power or importance. She had trained as a technician, but her low birth meant she was never allowed to work on anything that mattered. She had spent her whole life fixing broken lights and cleaning filters. Una taught her the molecular welding technique on her first day. Soha learned it in 3 hours. She was brilliant, and she had been wasted her entire life. After Soha came others. Valari workers who had been ignored because of their birth. Prisoners from conquered worlds who had skills nobody cared about. Engineers and technicians and inventors who had never been given a chance. Una took them all. She did not care about caste or species or history. She only cared about one thing. Could you learn? If you could learn, she would teach you. If you could not learn, she would find something else for you to do. The workshop grew. 20 workers became 50. 50 became 100. They came from a dozen different worlds, speaking a dozen different languages. But in the workshop, they all spoke the same language. The language of making things work. I taught them everything she knew. And then she learned from them. A prisoner from the Rithani homeworld showed her a new way to strengthen hull plating. A former Valari soldier taught her about the weaknesses in Imperial shield designs. A small blue alien, whose name Una could not pronounce, invented a faster way to calibrate targeting systems. They shared knowledge. They built on each other's ideas. They created things that none of them could have created alone. The workshop became famous across the fleet. Ship captains started requesting transfers to the Crimson Throne, just so they could have their equipment improved by Una's team. Admirals sent their personal weapons for upgrades. Even other royal families began making requests. Queen Valeth watched all of this with interest. One evening, she came to visit the workshop. She had not announced her arrival, so nobody was prepared. Workers were scattered across 3 decks, building and repairing and arguing about ideas. The air was full of noise and smoke and the smell of hot metal. Una was at her workbench, teaching the Rathani prisoner how to reinforce a piece of armor plating. She did not notice the queen until she was standing right behind her. "You are building something," Queen Valeth said. Una turned around and bowed quickly. "Your Majesty, I did not hear you come in. You were busy." The queen looked around the workshop. Her eyes moved over the workers, the equipment, the projects in progress. "You are building something larger than weapons and armor. What is it?" Una was silent for a moment. She knew she had to be careful with her answer, but she had also learned that the queen respected honesty more than flattery. "I am building what humans always build," she said. "A future." The queen raised one eyebrow. "Explain." "Before I came here, I was nobody. A simple engineer on a frozen moon. I fixed things because that was my job. I never thought about tomorrow. I never imagined anything better." Una gestured at the workshop around her. "But this place has shown me something. When people work together, when they share what they know, they can create things that none of them could create alone. That is what I am building. Not just machines, connections." Queen Valeth was quiet for a long moment. The workshop continued its noisy work around them. "My advisors tell me you are dangerous," the queen said finally. "They say you are creating a power base that could threaten the throne itself. Workers who are loyal to you instead of me. Knowledge that only you control." Una nodded. She had expected this conversation eventually. "Your advisors are correct." The queen's eyes widened slightly. "You admit this?" "I am not trying to hide it." Una met the queen's gaze directly. It was something that no slave, no commoner, no general had ever dared to do. "You conquered 63 star systems through war. You built an empire on blood and fear. But empires built on blood do not last. Yours is already crumbling at the edges. You can feel it, even if you will not admit it." She pointed at the workers around them. Valarian prisoners and aliens from a dozen worlds, all working side by side. "This is how you save it. Not through conquest. Through creation. Give people something to build instead of something to fear. Give them a reason to fight for you instead of against you. That is worth more than any army." The workshop had gone quiet. Everyone was listening now. Everyone was watching the queen, waiting for the order to execute the human who had spoken so boldly. But the order did not come. Instead, Queen Valeth smiled. It was a real smile, something her court had not seen in many years. "You are either the bravest person I have ever met," she said, "or the most foolish." "Probably both," Una admitted. The queen laughed. It was a warm sound, full of genuine amusement. "Keep building, little human," she said. "We will see where your future leads." The attack came without warning. The Keth Collective had been watching the Valari Empire for years. They were an old enemy, patient and careful. They had waited for the perfect moment to strike. When their fleet finally moved, it was devastating. 300 warships appeared from nowhere, right in the heart of Valari territory. They surrounded the Crimson Throne and its escort of 40 vessels. The numbers were impossible. 7 enemy ships for every Valari defender. It should have been a massacre. On the bridge of the Crimson Throne, alarms were screaming. Officers were running in every direction. The tactical display showed a wall of red, enemy ships closing in from all sides. Queen Valeth sat on her command throne, calm and still. She had fought in 100 battles. She had faced death more times than she could count. She was not afraid, but she knew the old tactics would not work today. Fighting retreats and last stands might preserve her honor, but they would not save her fleet. They would not save her empire. She needed something new. Engineering, she said into the ship-wide communication system. You have the fleet. Deep in the workshop that had grown to fill 3 entire decks, Una stood before a holographic display of the battle. Her team surrounded her. Soha was at her right hand. The Rithani scientist was at her left. 100 workers from a dozen worlds filled the room behind them. They had been preparing for this moment for 6 months. All ships, Una said, her voice steady and calm. Execute Protocol Aurora. Across the Valari fleet, systems came online that had never been used before. Hidden upgrades. Secret modifications. Improvements that Una's team had installed quietly over the past half-year. The shields flickered and suddenly doubled in strength. Una had redesigned the power distribution system using techniques from human mining ships. Simple changes that the Valari had never thought to make. The weapons began cycling twice as fast. The Rithani scientist had found a way to cool the firing chambers more efficiently, allowing for much faster shots. The engines roared with new power. Soha had removed the old safety limiters and replaced them with better ones, giving every ship 15% more speed. And the targeting systems, upgraded by the small blue alien whose name Una still could not pronounce, began hitting targets with perfect accuracy. The Keth Collective had expected a dying animal, weak and desperate. What they found was something else entirely. The battle lasted 4 hours. The Valari ships moved like dancers, faster and more agile than they had ever been. Their weapons fired in devastating waves, cutting through Keth shields with ease. Their own shields absorbed punishment that should have destroyed them. But the most important thing was not the technology. It was the coordination. Una had spent months building connections between the crews of different ships. Engineers who knew each other. Workers who had trained together. People who trusted each other because they had created things together. When one ship was damaged, others moved to protect it without needing orders. When an opportunity appeared, multiple ships attacked together without hesitation. They fought like a single organism, not a collection of separate vessels. The Keth Collective had never seen anything like it. By the 4th hour, 212 Keth ships had been destroyed or disabled. The Valari had lost 9. It was the greatest victory in the history of the Empire. When the battle was over, the Crimson Throne moved through the debris field. Valari ships were already beginning rescue and recovery operations. And for the first time, they were working alongside former slaves and prisoners, side by side. Equal partners in the aftermath. Queen Valith summoned Una to the bridge. The human arrived still wearing her work clothes, covered in grease and sweat. She had not slept in 2 days. She had spent the entire battle coordinating her teams, moving from crisis to crisis, solving problems that nobody else could solve. You saved the Empire today, the Queen said. No, Una shook her head. The people in that workshop saved the Empire. I just showed them how. She looked out at the stars, at the wreckage of the enemy fleet, at the Valari ships working alongside their former enemies, united in something that looked like hope. Where I come from, Una said, we have a saying. Give someone a fish and you feed them for a day. Teach someone to fish and you feed them for a lifetime. Queen Valith considered this. And what have you taught my empire, little human? Una smiled. It was a tired smile, but genuine. That fixing things is better than breaking them. That building together is stronger than conquering alone. That the smallest person in the room might have the biggest ideas. She turned to face the Queen. Your empire was dying, Your Majesty. Not from enemies outside, but from rot inside. I did not save it. I just gave it something to believe in. The queen was silent for a long time. "My advisors will never accept a human in a position of formal power," she said finally. "The old families would revolt. The traditions would not allow it." "I do not want power," Yuna said. "I just want to build things. Let me keep my workshop. Let me keep teaching. The rest will follow." And it did. 50 years later, historians would call the Battle of the Crimson Throne the turning point of civilization. Not of a war, but of an entire way of life. The workshop grew into an institution that spanned worlds. Engineers and creators from across the galaxy came to learn there. Former enemies became colleagues. Former slaves became masters. The empire did not fall. It transformed. Queen Valith ruled for another 100 years. When she finally died, her armor was placed in the center of the workshop's great hall. The same armor that had started everything. The same armor that a human slave had fixed in a garbage pile. The plaque beneath it was simple, fixed by human hands. Built by everyone. And in the histories taught to children across 1,000 worlds, there was a new proverb. It had come from a species that was once thought to be small and weak and unimportant. Humanity does not conquer. Humanity fixes. That was the human way.